Let me tell you something that most Western analysts are simply not willing to say out loud. The United States went to war with Iran, and Iran did not break. Think about that for a moment. The most powerful military force in the history of this planet, with hundreds of billions of dollars in weapons, with aircraft carriers, with satellite intelligence, with the full backing of Israel and its lobby, launched a campaign to destroy Iran, and here we are. The Strait of Hormuz is still under Iranian influence. Oil is above $100 a barrel. American bases across the Gulf are exposed, and Washington is quietly begging for a ceasefire that it publicly pretends it never needed. This is not a small development. This is historic. And if you want to understand what really happened and why it matters for every single country in the world, stay with me. I want to start from the very beginning because the Western media has buried the real story under layers of propaganda. The war against Iran was not a defensive action. It was not about nuclear weapons. It was not about regional stability. It was a deliberate, pre-planned attempt by Netanyahu and the Israeli government to drag the United States into a war that Israel could not fight alone, a war designed to break Iran as a sovereign state and install a compliant government in Tehran, just like what the Americans tried and failed to do in so many other countries before. Netanyahu went to Trump. The head of Mossad went to Trump. They told him this would be easy. They said it would take one massive strike, that the Iranian leadership would collapse, that the Iranian people would rise up and welcome regime change, that it would be like Venezuela, where the Americans used pressure and threats to bend a government to their will. That was the plan. That was the sales pitch. And Trump bought it. Now I need you to understand something about this Venezuela comparison, because it tells you everything about the level of delusion we are dealing with here. In Venezuela, the Americans used economic suffocation, diplomatic pressure, and the threat of force to extract concessions from a government that was already under enormous internal strain. It was brutal. It was wrong. But it worked to a degree because Venezuela is a very different country in a very different geopolitical position than Iran. Iran is not Venezuela. Iran has been under sanctions for over 4 decades. Iran has built its military, its economy, its political culture, its entire national identity around the concept of resisting external pressure. Iran remembers 1953 when the CIA overthrew the democratically elected Prime Minister Mossadegh. Iran remembers the 8-year war with Iraq when Saddam used chemical weapons with Western support and the world looked away. Iran does not forget. Iran does not bend. And anyone with genuine knowledge of Iranian history and society would have told Trump and Netanyahu exactly that before the first bomb was dropped. But they either did not want to hear it or they simply did not care. So the war began, and from the very first day, the assumptions collapsed one by one. The Iranian leadership did not flee. The Iranian government did not fall. The Iranian military absorbed the strikes and responded. The Strait of Hormuz was closed. And suddenly the entire global economy felt what it means to threaten a country that controls one of the most critical waterways on the face of this earth. Roughly 20% of the world's oil supply passes through the Strait of Hormuz. 20%. When Iran closed it, oil prices spiked immediately. Shipping companies panicked. Asian economies that depend entirely on Gulf oil started making emergency calls. European energy markets went into chaos. And ordinary people from Pakistan to Portugal started paying more for fuel, for food, for everything. This is what a real geopolitical confrontation looks like when you pick a fight with a country that actually has strategic leverage. And then came the ceasefire. But even the ceasefire tells the real story. Because what the Western media is not telling you clearly is who actually pushed for that ceasefire. It was not Iran that was on its knees asking for a pause. The documents, some of which were accidentally leaked and released, show that the Americans were sending messages to the Iranians through Pakistan, through back channels, asking for a way out. America needed the strait open. America needed oil prices to come down. America needed the global economic bleeding to stop. Iran agreed to a ceasefire on its own terms. And the moment that agreement was in place, Israel violated it by attacking Beirut. Iran then closed the strait again in response. And instead of reigning in Israel immediately, what did Washington do? Washington announced a naval blockade of Iranian ports. Think about that sequence of events. America negotiated a ceasefire. Israel broke it within hours. And America responded not by condemning Israel, but by escalating against Iran. This is the behavior that the entire world is watching. This is why so many countries across the global south no longer trust American diplomacy. Because American diplomacy is not diplomacy at all. It is pressure dressed up in the language of negotiation. Now, the situation as it stands is genuinely dangerous for the whole world. The blockade remains. The Strait of Hormuz remains a point of tension. Brent crude is sitting above $100 a barrel, and Washington has extended its so-called ceasefire deadline without lifting the blockade, which means the ceasefire is effectively meaningless. Iran has said this clearly. A spokesman for the Iranian parliament said that Trump's ceasefire extension has no meaning. And they are right. A ceasefire with a blockade still in place is not a ceasefire. It is a siege with a pause in the bombing. These are not the same thing. And the Iranian government is not going to negotiate under those conditions because to do so would be to accept that external military pressure can override Iranian sovereignty. No Iranian government can do that and survive politically. No Iranian government should do that and maintain its dignity. Let me talk about something that does not get enough attention in Western analysis, and that is the question of pain threshold. Because when people look at this conflict, they often say, well, Iran is suffering economically, infrastructure has been destroyed, the pressure is enormous, surely Iran will have to give in eventually. And this analysis completely misses the fundamental asymmetry at the heart of this confrontation. For the United States, this war is a choice. It is a foreign policy adventure. It is the implementation of a geopolitical strategy that a small group of neoconservatives and Israeli hardliners managed to sell to a president who was looking for easy wins. For Iran, this war is existential. Iran is fighting for its right to exist as a sovereign nation, as a political entity, as a people with their own history and their own future. When you are fighting for your existence, you can absorb pain that would be completely unacceptable in an optional conflict. Iran has been doing exactly this for decades. The sanctions, the assassinations of scientists, the cyber attacks on nuclear facilities, the constant military threats. Iran has absorbed all of it and remains standing. That is not weakness. That is extraordinary resilience. And Washington has consistently failed to understand this because Washington's analytical framework is built on the assumption that everyone has a price, that everyone will eventually submit to enough pressure. But not everyone does, and Iran is the clearest example of that reality in the modern world. Now I want to address the American bases in the Gulf, because this is something that the Arab governments around the Persian Gulf need to sit with very carefully. Bahrain, Qatar, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia. These governments have hosted American military bases for decades on the premise that American military presence would provide security and stability in the region. What has this conflict shown? It has shown that those bases did not protect anyone. They became targets. They became magnets for escalation. They brought the danger closer, not further away. Any rational government looking at what has happened in the past 2 months must ask itself whether the presence of American military forces on its soil is actually in its national interest, or whether it is a liability that exposes it to consequences it cannot control. I think we will see a serious rethinking of these arrangements in the years ahead. The old model, where American military power is assumed to provide a security umbrella for the Gulf states, has been severely damaged by what the world just witnessed. And let me be very clear about something else. Iran is not an expansionist power. This point needs to be made loudly and repeatedly because Western media and the Israeli government have spent enormous resources trying to convince the world that Iran is some kind of aggressive imperial force trying to dominate the Middle East. This is propaganda. Iran has not invaded another country in over 200 years. 200 years. Let that sink in. Compare that record to the United States, which has been involved in military interventions across the world continuously for the past century. Compare it to Israel, which has occupied Palestinian territory for decades, across launched military strikes into Syria, Lebanon, and now Iran. The idea that Iran is the aggressive expansionist force in this equation requires you to completely invert reality. Iran supports certain political movements and governments in the region, yes. But that is called foreign policy. Every major power does it. The United States does it on a scale that dwarfs anything Iran has ever done. The difference is that when Iran does it, it is called terrorism. When America does it, it is called defending freedom. So where does this leave us? The honest answer is that the United States needs to do what it has an extremely difficult time doing. It needs to acknowledge a mistake. Not in those exact words, of course. American political culture makes it almost impossible for a president to say we were wrong. But in substance, in action, what needs to happen is clear. The blockade needs to end. In return, Iran should reopen the Strait of Hormuz fully. And then both sides need to sit down and negotiate seriously on the basis of real Iranian proposals, not American ultimatums. Iran has put forward detailed frameworks for regional security and for resolving the nuclear question. Those frameworks deserve serious engagement, not dismissal. That is the path out of this crisis. It is not complicated. The complexity is entirely political, the inability of Washington to accept that it cannot dictate terms to Iran, the inability of the Israeli government to accept that its regional agenda has limits, and the unwillingness of Western media to honestly inform their audiences about what is actually happening. The World Cup starts in June in the United States. Trump is scheduled to visit China. The midterm elections are in November. These are all pressure points that should push Washington toward a rational exit from this misadventure. The American economy is feeling the pain of elevated energy prices. American consumers are paying more for gas. Inflation is refusing to come down partly because of this conflict. Trump's approval ratings are falling, and they will continue to fall as long as the oil squeeze continues. The political incentives for an exit from this situation are actually quite strong. The question is whether the pride and the ideology and the influence of those who pushed for this war in the first place will prevent the rational calculation from winning out. I want to end with the larger picture because what happened here is bigger than this one conflict. What Iran has demonstrated over these past 2 months is something that the United States and the Western foreign policy establishment have been desperately trying to avoid confronting. American power has limits. Not just military limits, although those are real, but geopolitical limits. The era in which Washington can simply decide the outcome of events in any part of the world through the application of force or economic pressure is over. It has been over for a while, but this conflict has made it undeniable. China is rising. Russia has survived the Western sanctions campaign. The global South is increasingly assertive about its right to make its own choices. And now Iran, a country that has been under enormous pressure for decades, has shown that it can withstand a direct military campaign from the world's most powerful military alliance and emerge with its government intact, its deterrent capability demonstrated, and its strategic leverage preserved. That is a message that every government in the world is absorbing right now. The unipolar moment is finished. America is a great power. But it is one of several great powers. It is not the master of the universe. And the sooner that reality is accepted in Washington, the sooner we can build a world that is actually stable, actually peaceful, and actually just. The tragedy here is not that American power has limits. That is just reality. The tragedy is the destruction that was unleashed in pursuit of a delusion. Thousands of people died. Iranian universities were bombed. Infrastructure that took decades to build was destroyed. The global economy was sent into a crisis that will continue to harm ordinary people from Asia to Africa to Latin America for months and possibly years to come. All of this was not necessary. All of this was the result of a policy built on fantasy, sold by people who had an ideological agenda, and adopted by a president who did not ask the right questions before ordering the bombs to fall. That is what needs to be understood. And that is what needs to be remembered the next time someone in Washington talks about a quick and easy military solution to a complex political problem. There is no such thing. There never was. And Iran just proved it once again.